In the year 1876, the United States dispatched its celebrated figure, George Custer, to quell Sitting Bull's resistance in Montana. Upon reaching the summit of a hill, Custer was taken aback by the sight of an unexpectedly large number of tents. Nevertheless, he remained undeterred, raising his hat and exclaiming, "Hurrah, boys, we've got them!" Unbeknownst to him, he was advancing into one of the most extensive Native American war camps ever assembled, with no reinforcements on the way to assist him. Just 1 hour later, every one of his men would be dead. Custer's legacy would not be one of triumph, but rather a symbol of one of the most significant disasters in American military history. How did the situation deteriorate so drastically? This is the astonishing account of Custer's last stand. Born to a farming family in Ohio, George Custer was an exceptionally ambitious individual, yearning for glory and a place in the annals of history. As a youth, he exhibited sharpness, boldness, and pride. He enrolled at West Point in 1857, where he was noted for his misconduct, a staggering 726 times, the highest record for any cadet prior to him. Despite his troublesome behavior, his instructors and peers recognized his potential as an outstanding soldier. The onset of the Civil War provided Custer with the opportunity to demonstrate his capabilities. He emerged as a remarkable officer, securing numerous victories throughout the conflict and consistently leading his troops from the front lines. He earned a reputation for charging into situations where others would hesitate, never asking his men to undertake tasks he would not face himself. His soldiers held him in high regard, and his superiors were so impressed that he became one of the youngest generals in U.S. history at the age of 23. The media referred to him as the Boy General, and soon the courageous General Custer, with his flamboyant demeanor and distinctive long golden hair, became a household name. On July 3, 1863, Custer and his troops successfully maintained the Union line during the Battle of Gettysburg. Leading from the front in full officer's attire, Custer charged into the Confederate forces at a pivotal moment, turning the battle in favor of the Union. His distinguished service persisted until the war's conclusion. The table on which Robert E. Lee signed his surrender, later presented to Custer's wife, acknowledged that no individual had contributed more to securing this surrender than her husband. Following the war, Custer was tasked with leading the 7th Cavalry to confront the Plains Indians, a duty he despised as it deprived him of opportunities for glory. It was not until 1868 that he would find another opportunity to achieve the fame he craved. As the United States continued its westward expansion, it set its sights on the Black Hills, a territory already inhabited by the Sioux, who were reluctant to relinquish it. In April 1868, the Sioux and the U.S. government signed the Fort Laramie Treaty, granting the Sioux full rights to the Black Hills, contingent upon their cessation of attacks on settlers and their confinement to a reservation. However, the U.S. had no intention of honoring this treaty as the Black Hills were deemed too valuable, and they anticipated that an influx of settlers would soon provoke the Sioux into violating the agreement. Most Sioux, unaware of this betrayal, accepted the treaty, with the notable exception of Chief Sitting Bull. As a member of the Lakota, one of the two major divisions of the Sioux, Sitting Bull rejected the treaty, believing that the U.S. would inevitably encroach upon their lands and that resistance was essential to preserving their way of life. In contrast to Custer's boldness and recklessness, Sitting Bull exhibited calmness and caution, earning his name for his tendency to think before acting. He was not only a military leader, but also a spiritual figure, claiming to have received visions from the Great Spirit that guided him in his efforts to defeat the Americans. Sitting Bull garnered support from numerous Lakota individuals and smaller factions of the nearby Cheyenne community. He formed a coalition of nomadic raiders to resist American expansion. Collaborating closely with his trusted ally, Gull, another Lakota, they initiated raids against American settlements and rival Native American tribes, such as the Crow and the Arikara. Following the events at Fort Laramie, Sitting Bull's coalition began targeting U.S. settlements. The United States recognized the need for a courageous and skilled leader to counter Sitting Bull, which led to George Custer being dispatched with the 7th Cavalry in 1876 October 1868. As winter approached, a time of heightened vulnerability, Custer followed the Washita River in Oklahoma and discovered a Cheyenne camp on November 26th. At dawn on the 27th, he ordered his men to charge into the camp, resulting in the deaths of many, including Cheyenne warriors, women, and children. Major Joel Elliott, his second-in-command, took 20 men to chase the fleeing Cheyenne, while Custer remained in the camp, claiming 103 Cheyenne lives and viewing it as a significant victory. However, Custer's personal ambitions interfered with his judgment. The village he attacked belonged to a Cheyenne chief who was amicable towards the U.S., complicating peace efforts with the Cheyenne. Additionally, this was merely one of many villages along the river, and news of the attack spread quickly, prompting Custer to retreat. Compounding the situation, Major Elliott did not return, and with other Cheyenne villages now mobilizing, Custer chose not to wait for him. Weeks later, Major Elliott and his men were discovered deceased, leading many in the 7th Cavalry to hold Custer responsible for their demise, with Captain Frederick Benteen being the most vocal critic, penning a letter that blamed Custer for Elliott's death, which subsequently leaked to the press, inciting Custer's fury. Despite Benteen remaining under his command, mutual forgiveness eluded them. Custer's triumph at Washita rekindled his fame, transforming him into a celebrated figure of the American West. He subsequently spent several years leading the 7th Cavalry against Native American tribes. In 1873, he was permanently stationed at Fort Abraham Lincoln in Dakota, enabling him to effectively address the challenges posed by Sitting Bull and his resistance to American expansion. At this juncture, two significant individuals entered his narrative. Major Marcus Reno became a key officer on Custer's staff. Reno, known for his irritable demeanor and problematic drinking habits, found Custer equally unbearable and arrogant, much like Captain Benteen. Fortunately for Custer, he had the support of others in his command to counteract critics like Benteen and Reno. His brothers, Tom and Boston, along with his brother-in-law, Lieutenant James Calhoun, and even his wife, moved to Fort Abraham Lincoln to be near him. Custer's support network extended beyond white Americans. In 1873, a half-Sioux, half-Arikara scout named Bloody Knife joined Custer's unit, and the two developed a strong friendship. Not all Native Americans sided with Sitting Bull. Bloody Knife had a personal vendetta against him. Having been mistreated by Sitting Bull in the past, he harbored a particular animosity towards Gull, Sitting Bull's right-hand man, who had bullied him during childhood. This rivalry had tragic consequences, as Bloody Knife nearly killed Gull in a confrontation, while Gull later took the lives of Bloody Knife's brothers and son in separate raids. Custer was the obvious choice to lead an expedition into the Black Hills in 1874, officially aimed at locating a site for a fort to deter Sitting Bull. However, the true objective was to discover gold in the Black Hills and to serve as a significant propaganda effort to encourage a surge of prospectors and settlers to the area. The expedition resembled more of a tour than a military operation. They faced minimal opposition, and Custer utilized more ammunition while hunting with his brothers and Bloody Knife than in combat against the Native Americans. Journalists and photographers accompanying the expedition disseminated accounts and visuals of Custer's thrilling frontier journey and the successful gold discovery. This expedition sparked a gold rush, resulting in 15,000 white settlers inundating the area by late 1875. Officially, as independent settlers, the U.S. government bore no responsibility, thus not breaching the Fort Laramie Treaty. However, President Ulysses S. Grant was fully supportive of their actions, anticipating a violent response from Sitting Bull and the Lakota, which would provide a pretext for the complete annexation of the Black Hills. In September 1875, Washington made a final attempt to persuade the Sioux to sell the Black Hills amicably. Sitting Bull's forewarnings about the Americans' relentless pursuit of land were validated. The Sioux declined the offer, prompting the president to establish a firm stance. Any Lakota or Cheyenne who did not relocate to U.S. reservations by January 1876 would be deemed hostile. This demand was unreasonable, especially since it was issued in November 1875, when winter had already set in. Even those willing to comply would face the peril of freezing to death. This situation was a clear injustice. The expedition aimed at pursuing Sitting Bull and his so-called hostile Indians departed from Fort Abraham Lincoln on May 17, 1876, with General Alfred Terry, a supporter of Custer, holding ultimate authority over the mission. Scouting reports indicated that Sitting Bull had assembled his followers along the Yellowstone River, particularly at the confluence of four smaller rivers: the Powder, the Tongue, the Rosebud, and the Bighorn. Terry and Custer were to lead the main body of the army westward along the Yellowstone, exiting Dakota. A secondary contingent led by General John Gibbon was set to advance from the west in Montana, while a third force under General George Crook would approach from the south in Wyoming. The objective was to sever all escape routes and ensnare the Indians between the two armies, akin to herding cattle. Custer regarded this operation as yet another enjoyable expedition, which even irritated Terry due to Custer's frequent distractions for hunting or exploration with his brothers. Major Reno and Captain Benteen shared similar frustrations. Reno felt a sense of relief when Terry assigned him to a reconnaissance mission along the Rosebud River for several days, during which he successfully located Sitting Bull's trail. Upon returning with this intelligence, Custer chastised him for not pursuing it. With Sitting Bull's trail hot on their heels, there was little time for disputes between the two men. Terry opted to divide his forces once more, intending to join Gibbon's troops from Montana and then proceed down the Bighorn River from the north. Custer, on the other hand, would head south, following the trail across the Rosebud. They had a clear understanding of Sitting Bull's likely position at this point. Should Custer encounter Sitting Bull, he was instructed to maneuver southward and await Terry and Gibbon's arrival from the north. However, Gibbon's expectations of Custer's compliance were akin to anticipating a famished dog to resist the food placed before it. Everyone anticipated that Custer would seize the opportunity for glory the moment it presented itself. "Custer, do not be greedy, leave some for us," was the final admonition given to him before his departure, to which he responded, "No, I will not." The Americans' assumptions proved correct. Sitting Bull and his warriors were precisely where they had anticipated. Following President Grant's ultimatum earlier that year, Sitting Bull had rallied thousands more warriors, aware that their only chance of survival lay in their numbers. If they were to fail, this summer could mark their last as free nomads on the plains. Sitting Bull's call resonated widely, attracting approximately 8,000 individuals to his cause. Gull remained his primary advisor, while also attracting a number of remarkable new followers, among whom Crazy Horse distinguished himself. A young and fearless member of a different Lakota branch, Crazy Horse claimed to possess visions that granted him significant power, which inspired his name. He was the first to confront the American troops advancing against them that summer. On June 17th, General Crook's forces from Wyoming were stationed along the Rosebud River when Crazy Horse's scouts detected their presence. With 1,500 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors supporting him, Crazy Horse audaciously charged at an American army of comparable size. Historically, Native Americans required a larger force to secure victory in open combat, but Crazy Horse defied this norm. He commanded his warriors to encircle the Americans, ensuring they were never afforded a moment's respite. Riders attacked from both the left and right, leaving the Americans uncertain of where to direct their fire. Only the timely assistance of Crook's Crow and Cheyenne scouts allowed Crook to retreat after suffering 30 casualties. Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull achieved an extraordinary victory over the Americans in open battle, leaving Crook unsettled as he promptly reported back to his superiors about the most remarkable display of combat prowess he had ever witnessed from Native Americans. Notably, he refrained from informing Custer or Terry. Aware that American forces were advancing, Sitting Bull directed his people to relocate to a new campsite. 8,000 Lakota and Cheyenne followed him to a location they referred to as the Valley of the Greasy Grass, where they set up their tents in the shadow of the hills along the Little Bighorn River, which flowed into the main Bighorn a few miles to the north. There they engaged in their traditional Sundance celebration, during which it was said that Sitting Bull experienced another vision, witnessing hundreds of American soldiers falling into the Indian camp. Sitting Bull interpreted this as an indication that a significant victory was imminent. Meanwhile, Custer's forces had been tracking Sitting Bull's movements across the Rosebud and up the hills towards the Bighorn River, unaware of Crook's earlier defeat. Observing the trail, Bloody Knife and the other scouts noted evidence suggesting a far greater number of Indians than Custer had anticipated, possibly in the thousands. Bloody Knife cautioned Custer that they might be outnumbered and advised waiting for Terry and Gibbon before launching an attack. Just after dawn on June 25th, Custer's scouts ascended the hills a few miles east of the Little Bighorn and spotted columns of smoke rising from Sitting Bull's camp. Custer was convinced that this was the day of his triumph. He commanded 700 men divided among 12 companies, with one company remaining to protect their supplies while the others prepared for battle. Custer planned to lead 5 companies across the river to assault the camp from the north, while Major Reno would take 3 companies to attack from the south, assisted by Bloody Knife in scouting the route. Captain Benteen was assigned the remaining 3 companies to maneuver further south around Reno before joining the fight on the western flank of the camp. Although Custer was displeased to depend on 2 men he despised, all his trusted men, including his brothers Tom and Boston and his brother-in-law Lieutenant Calhoun, were already with him. Custer advanced north, concealing himself behind hills until the last moment. Finally, around 3:30 p.m., he reached the last ridgeline overlooking the camp and was astonished to see thousands of tents stretching over 3 miles, far exceeding his expectations. He hastily wrote some orders. "Benteen, come on, big village, come quick, bring packs," and dispatched a rider to deliver the message to the captain. However, Custer, never one to delay, chose to charge ahead regardless. The general raised his hat high and shouted, "Hooray, lads, we have them!" before charging down the hill. To the south, Major Reno's troops had crossed the river and were advancing towards the camp with 150 soldiers. Bloody Knife and the scouts were the first to confront Lakota and Cheyenne warriors at the camp's perimeter, marking the initial alert for Sitting Bull's people that they were under siege. Following tradition, Sitting Bull and Gull occupied the southern section of the camp and were the first to face Reno's soldiers. Upon meeting the first signs of resistance, Reno commanded his men to dismount and establish a firing line. Bullets flew into the camp, hitting men, women, and children indiscriminately. Sitting Bull's immediate instinct was to safeguard his people. He instructed his nephew and another warrior to hasten southward and attempt to negotiate with the assailants, but both were shot. Sitting Bull mounted his horse, only for an American bullet to bring it down beneath him. This was the final blow. "They have shot my beloved horse. It feels as though they have shot me." Counterattack. Gull and Crazy Horse spearheaded the response in the south. Reno was entirely unprepared for any organized resistance, allowing the Indians to halt his advance. Survivors later disclosed that Reno had been drinking throughout the day, impairing his judgment. Reno and Bloody Knife attempted to devise their next strategy. The Lakota community was small, and many of those engaged in battle would likely recognize Bloody Knife alongside Reno. He was a clear target. Just as Reno was midway through a sentence, a bullet struck Bloody Knife in the back of the head, killing him instantly. His blood and brains splattered across the drunken major's face. The death of Bloody Knife shattered Reno's determination, prompting him to call for a retreat. "Anyone wishing to escape, follow me." Command disintegrated as Reno's men hurried back across the river. The soldiers abandoned their horses and firearms as they hurried through the water and up the steep banks. The Native Americans merely needed to position themselves on the opposite side and fire upon them. Meanwhile, Benteen, stationed on the hills to the southeast, heard the disturbance and returned to investigate. As he awaited on the hilltop, Reno ascended the hillside with a few of his remaining men. "For God's sake, Benteen, stop your command and assist me. I have lost half of my men." Benteen frowned, posing a singular question. "Where is Custer?" Reno had no response. Benteen could only shake his head, having witnessed this scenario before. "It is yet another Major Elliott incident," he sighed. Reflecting on the encounter at Washita years prior, Benteen believed Custer had once again deserted them in pursuit of glory. The fact that Benteen, Reno, and their men could hear the gunfire erupting in the direction Custer had taken indicated that something more significant was occurring. Although Benteen received a written order from Custer to provide assistance, he chose to disregard it. Instead, Benteen and Reno remained on the hill for the next 2 hours until the gunfire subsided, prompting one of Benteen's furious captains to venture out for his own investigation. What he discovered was shocking. The exact fate of Custer after he charged down the hill remains unclear. The following account provides the best insight into the events of Custer's last stand. Custer gathered his men atop a hill, later referred to as Calhoun Hill, to assess the situation and await Benteen. Custer was known for taking Native American hostages to compel others to surrender. It is probable that he intended to implement this strategy once more. His men would cross the Little Bighorn River into the camp, seize as many women and children as possible, and force Sitting Bull to capitulate to save them. The plan was straightforward. Charge down the hill and ford the river. Custer would have led his men from the front, and the sight of him and his troops would have been formidable. Even Sitting Bull, upon first learning of Custer's assault from the north, felt fear. "We thought we were defeated," he remarked. However, Cheyenne and Lakota warriors were hidden on the opposite bank of the river and commenced firing at the American forces. At this point, Crazy Horse and the other warriors from the camp had ceased their pursuit of Reno and were hastening to confront Custer. Custer had misjudged the size of their forces. The Americans began to retreat up the hill. Lieutenant Calhoun and his unit established a defensive position atop a hill that now bears his name. Custer, along with his brother and the majority of his remaining troops, retreated to what is now known as Last Stand Hill. Evidence from the battlefield suggests that nearly half of Calhoun's contingent did not survive the return to his position. Within moments, Crazy Horse had directed a group of mounted warriors to encircle them from the rear, while the main body of Indians pursued them up the slopes. Calhoun's men were quickly overwhelmed, resulting in the death of every soldier. By the time Custer's brother-in-law's position was compromised, Custer must have realized that Benteen was not arriving with the reinforcements he had requested. Thousands of Indians spread across the hills surrounding him, engulfing the remnants of his forces. The final moments of Custer's men were marked by a barrage of arrows and bullets. The chaos was so intense that some Indians inadvertently struck their own. The identity of the last warrior standing remains uncertain, but Sitting Bull later recounted what his warriors had shared with him. It was said that at the site of the final confrontation, where the last stand occurred, Custer's long hair resembled a sheaf of corn, with all its ears fallen around him. Custer's last stand may have signified the end for them all. Shortly after the gunfire from Custer's position ceased, Benteen and Reno found themselves encircled at their location, now referred to as Reno Hill. Their 400 men entrenched themselves and successfully repelled the Indians throughout the night of the 25th. It was only at sunset on the 26th, when scouts spotted Terry and Gibbon approaching from the north, that Sitting Bull commanded his people to retreat. General Terry arrived shortly thereafter. The initial inquiry posed was identical to that which Benteen had directed at Reno. "Where is Custer?" The remains of 200 soldiers from 5 companies of the 7th Cavalry were discovered at the site where they had fallen the previous day. Some had suffered scalping and mutilation at the hands of the Indians. It was Benteen who, while traversing the area among the deceased, was urgently summoned by a private to examine a specific body. 2 bullet wounds were evident, one in the chest and another in the head. "My God, it is he." On July 6, 1876, the 7th Cavalry's headquarters at Fort Abraham Lincoln received news of Custer's catastrophic defeat. Within a matter of days, the entire nation was aware of the calamity at Little Bighorn. Just days prior, on July 4, 1876, America had commemorated its centennial. This was a time of optimism and hope, celebrating both the achievements of the past and the potential for the future. It was an occasion to honor American heroes like Custer, who was engaged in combat against those savage, primitive Indians at that very moment. Custer's demise should have been inconceivable. Americans had perceived themselves as invulnerable and an unstoppable force of civilization. When the news broke that Indians had killed a hero like Custer, along with 268 men in open combat, many Americans found it difficult to comprehend. Some attributed the outcome to Custer's recklessness, noting his tendency to rush into peril for personal glory, which ultimately led to his downfall. Others placed blame on Benteen and Reno, who had disregarded Custer's commands and remained idle while his troops were being decimated. Surprisingly, few acknowledged the role of Sitting Bull and his warriors, who had demonstrated their prowess in battle on multiple occasions. America had dispatched its finest against them and faced defeat. Sitting Bull was prepared for whatever challenge might come next.